Hello, this is Peter Cunningham from Seraphim. I'm going to talk now about how to use incremental profiles in future to model workovers. Our recommendation is that workovers can often be best modelled as pseudo-wells, and where they can be easily added and removed from the forecast. So I'm going to show you in a very simplified future run how that works, and then afterwards I'm going to show you some ways how you might generate the incrementals. One thing to note is that this is an area where 4.1 has introduced some significant improvements. So what I'm showing might have been more difficult in previous versions. So if you've tried it before and it wasn't successful, I would suggest you try again with version 4.1. Okay. So here is a future model where we've got our base well, which has got a decline profile going forward, and we've defined a workover as a pseudo well, and the pseudo well it's specified as being incremental, so its profile is shared out to some physical wells, and in this particular case we're using the option you can specify, you can say to which wells does the increment does it go to, and here we're saying it goes to a single well to DA05, and we're saying that the incremental profile is a table, and this is where it's specified what it is. I'll talk you through. We've got an incremental profile generated from another future run. I'll show that future run in a second. If we look at the chart of the thing, we'll see this has got a fairly typical profile of a workover where quite a bit of the effect is acceleration. So with that, the profile is positive at first, but then in later life it goes negative. One of the key things to note is that you've got to be able, for this to work properly, you've got to be conveniently be able to tell future at what point to start reading from the table. And there's improved functionality in 4.1 here. You can specify either the point in terms of cumulative operating days, or for the table, or specify the date here. With incremental profiles, you will get some plotting on the decline plots, but it's somewhat limited because they're not yet and they've not yet been adjusted to allow for the negative rates and something. We'll be changing that fairly soon. Okay. So we've got the physical well and the workover defined in different projects, and then we define what forecasts we want. I'm just going to get rid of these ones. So we've got a base forecast and then a forecast with the workover as well. Then when we run the forecasts, what future does is at each time step it takes the incremental profile and allocates it to the well potential of the physical wells for you, and then the constraints are applied to the physical profile and incremental profile combined. You can't simply apply it to the incremental profile, because otherwise the constraint calculation would think that any negative rates are simply not could simply be shut in and not produced. In terms of the output, you have an option of, when you define the forecast, of either reporting the increment under the physical well, which is the default with this unticked. Alternatively, you can split it out again, strip it from the output calculated through the physical well, and report it separately under the name of the incremental well from which it comes. For that, you would have to tick this box here. So, if we look at the results, we'll see we've got on the oil side, we've got our base profile, we've got the increment, and here we've also got a calculation of the difference between the two. It should reproduce in the absence of constraint, should reproduce the original incremental profile we specified, but except of course the time shifts and the like. So that illustrates using an incremental profile to model Workover. Then the question is, well, where would we get our incremental profile? One option would be to generate it externally, for example, to calculate it in Excel. But something that's often convenient is to use a separate future run to generate it. And I'll show you a couple of methods for doing this. One of the simpler ones is to model the Workover as a planned change with rate multipliers and possibly reserves multipliers. And that's what we do in this model here. Again, we've got to start with a simple well, and we have defined a planned change representing the Workover. This planned change happens at a certain date, and at that date it applies a multiplier to the well potential, to the rate, to the axes of the rate versus cumulative production relationship. And here we're applying a 1.5 rates multiplier and a 1.2 reserves multiplier. So the end result will be some additional production, but it's mostly an acceleration. And then we've defined our base profile without the Workover and our base plus Workover with it. We've also defined under add edit difference forecasts. We've defined difference forecast is simply one normal forecast minus another. And here we're saying let's look at the difference between the profile with the Workover and the profile without. And with these, when it calculated, it gave us again a base, an increment, and the difference. And that difference could either be used directly, it could be part, that could be part of your main future model, or depending, if you wanted to have a separate line for each Workover in your well approval manager, you could use it as the increment for the pseudo well that represents the Workover in your main model. Another option in terms of generating incremental profiles, and this is something that I would recommend only in auxiliary future models, not in the main future model, is to define a different well potential, to add an additional scenario so that you can sketch in terms of rate versus cumulative or rate versus time. You can sketch with an adjustable table the spike that results from the Workover. And here is a model with this set up. So what we've done is we've added an additional scenario, we've got our mid scenario, and we've got a mid with Workover. So we've got now we've got two separate potentials. And here, for the mid with workover, we said we're going to use a adjustable table with quite a few points, and then on the decline side we've moved the points around so that we've got the change in relationship that we expect. And then here, when we come to defining the base profile and the base plus workover, what we have to do is we have to say that the base uses the well potentials from one scenario, and with the workovers you use the well potentials from the scenario where, including the workovers. And again, you can define, you can take the increment of take the difference between the two as the increment, and then that is what will be used in your main future model. So with those, you get the base is workover and the difference between the two. To summarise, what we recommend is, in terms of your main model, we would recommend against having separate scenarios for workovers, because that makes it difficult to manipulate your workovers to change the dates and all that. You can use separate scenarios to model the well potential, but do that in a separate model and generate incremental profiles, and then use those incremental profiles in your main model. Going back to it, let me quickly go back to it, where for your workover you can then have a separate line and you can manipulate it and you can change the dates, etc. Of course, bearing always in mind that any change of date like that it's an approximation. When making the assumption that the rate versus cumulative, the rate versus the potential, the incremental curve in terms of the well potential, that it can be taken to be relatively unchanged by the hopefully relatively small changes in the data. We'll be looking in sensitivities, etc. Okay, thank you.